This is the second video out of 3, and in this one I want to talk about a Freudian interpretation of mass media. Not all of mass media, obviously, but a particular object. One of the things you'll be doing, your assignment after you finish your mediated project, including the reflection that I've described in the first video, your assignment after that is to do an analysis of any piece of mass media. Now, I've got 2 pieces that I want to talk about and 2 ways I want to talk about them. I'm going to go back to some things that we studied in the Brummett text and draw those forward in order to use them on these particular pieces of media. A couple of things, many things you can do in interpreting mass media. But first, I want to give a Freudian interpretation of a joke. Okay, the joke that I want us to look at is a joke from the 19th century, that was early 20th century, that was originally printed in Sweden and then made its way over to the United States and was published in the United States in one of the collections of jokes that was assembled by a Chicago publisher and got wide circulation throughout America. So we're looking at a book, okay, early mass media. And in this joke, we see a young boy standing in a classroom, and the teacher says to him, the boy's name is Levi Nathanson, the teacher says, "Can Levi tell me what the world turns on?" And Levi responds by saying, "The world turns itself on an axis, or on a corporation." I'm sorry, he says, "The world turns itself on a corporation." We don't get the joke in English because the 2 words that we want to focus on aren't the same in English as they are in Swedish. They're very similar. The world turns itself, as we would well know, on an axis. But in Swedish, the boy says the world turns itself on an aktie, which is short for aktiebolaget, or a corporation. All kinds of things are going on there that are illustrated by Freud in his theories about joke. There it is. This is the book that it comes from. This is Freud's book called The Joke and Its Relation to the Unconscious. It's called The Joke and Its Relation, I forget whatever, it has several terms, English terms. This is the translation that I'm using. And in his examination of the structure of jokes, Freud maintains that a good joke has 2 parts. One is compression, and the other is substitution. And here we see in this joke the compression and substitution at work. We have little Levi Nathanson, substituting aktie for axis. Aktie, corporation, for axis, the points on which the world turns. But there's more going on here than just substitution. Many jokes have substitution. But Freud says that a joke is very like a dream, and that the work we do in joking is very like the work we do in dreaming. So what do we do in dreaming? Well, according to Freudian theory, in dreaming, we take care of the things that we have suppressed during our conscious life, things that we either find socially unacceptable or psychically unacceptable to do in conscious life. We would suppress sexual things. We suppress taboo things. And here we see barely suppressed a kind of anti-Semitism that actually was fairly common in late 19th century and well into the 20th century in Sweden. Anti-Semitism was not exactly suppressed. Yet even in polite society, one could not be overtly anti-Semitic and find oneself well accepted. August Strindberg, for example, was virulently anti-Semitic. He accused his publisher, who was Jewish, of robbing him blind, of doing all the monetary things that many people will accuse Jews of doing. And here we see young Levi Nathanson, obviously a Jewish name, behaving as it's assumed that Jews behave. So we have in the joke working out the kind of anti-Semitism that's fairly common in Swedish society, not entirely unheard of, and yet is already being frowned upon. By the time of World War II, when there are brown shirts in Sweden, at the end of World War II, anti-Semitism becomes very frowned upon, and Sweden is one of the leaders in trying to understand the reasons for the Holocaust. But here at the beginning of the 19th century, we find what Freud says, that jokes work structurally by compressing more than one idea and then substituting for the one idea. But we also find that the joke does part of what we want to do in our dream work, which is to allow the venting of those things we have repressed in our ordinary life. We could go much further with the analysis. If we looked at the picture, we would see in the boy something of the characteristics given to the stereotyped Jew. The boy is dark-haired rather than blonde-haired. The boy has a rather odd shirt on. He doesn't look terribly. We would call him a geek or a dork. He is not exactly your social companion for most of your life. Jewishness in Swedish society was tolerated, but not tolerated well. In Stockholm, there was at least one old synagogue. There may have been more than one. I'm not sure. I've been to the one old synagogue in Stockholm, but Jews were not well accepted. They were, like many of the immigrant populations then and now, barely tolerated. So here we have the barely tolerated being made the butt of the joke, and the anti-Semitic feeling that has been suppressed in the daytime coming out in what Freud says is essentially the same work that needs to be done in dream work. So that's our second video. What you'll do is somewhat similar. You can take a book like Freud or another of the classics, Aristotle. Brummett talks about that, and you can use that work as a way. Use this, for example, as a way to interpret the piece of mass media. You're essentially doing a form of literary criticism. You're not necessarily going to interpret it as mass media per se. That is, why did this show up in joke books in Sweden and then in America? Not our concern. We want to just interpret this particular joke using a Freudian frame of reference. So you can do the same thing. You can use Aristotle. You can use Freud. You can use Marx. You can use post-Marxist thought. You can use, as we will in our third video, you can use the work of Kenneth Burke. In our third video, we'll turn to Kenneth Burke and a movie that I've done a great deal of study with, The Front Page. So, hang on, we're about to go to that one.